Last part of lesson three. This is going to be how did the Cold War end on the topic that will never end, right? So here we go. Getting right in it. It all starts with this dude. This is Ronald Reagan. He is going to basically put his foot down after 40-ish years of long fighting with the Soviet Union, basically bickering back and forth. He refused to negotiate with the Soviet Union during his first term. He basically established his dominance right away. And all the while, he is going to heavily invest in building our military, building nuclear weapons, because he knew the Soviet Union could not keep up with them. Their economy was not doing very well in the 80s. Neither was ours, but he basically was a poker player. And every time that he built something, he really publicized it. And all the while, Great Britain is going to finally say, like, yeah, United States, way to get back on that horse. So, with this happening, on top of other countries joining NATO, which is something I talked about in part. No, I talked it back in the last lesson of World War II. You're going to notice that this is going to basically be the line in the sand. So, why does this matter to us? We have a lot of homies in our back. So, if the Soviet Union did start something, there's more of us in blue than them in red, I guess would be a thing. So when you go into again Ronald Reagan and how he brought about it out at the end, he is going to be very open about this thing being developed called the Strategic Defense Initiative. And you got to remember, in 1983, the world was crazy with Star Wars. Okay, yes, I'm crazy with Star Wars, but this is kind of a more thing for them. But he is going to publicize this new space weapon that can shoot down nuclear missiles from space. So he even had this video made up of this is how it's going to work, and it was like computer generated images, stuff that the Soviet Union could not do because, again, their technology was way behind because of their isolation. So when they did see all of this, and we talked about how much it cost, they were scared. But the funny thing was, this was all one big, massive lie. Ronald Reagan didn't really build this thing. He didn't really spend $80 billion on it, but he sure sold it. So this is what you're also going to see happening: the stockpiling of weapons. And again, this goes up to what, 2015 ish. But notice, and we're talking about between the 80s and the 90s here. Notice who's leading the charge now, and it's the Soviet Union. So they're spending every penny they pretty much got to try to keep up with us and notice outdo us. So that's going to be part of their downfall as well. But again, when you go into Ronald Reagan and what he was doing with anti communism, he was doing the same thing the other presidents were doing. He was funding anti communist movements in other countries. So, and most notable is Afghanistan, one lasting conflict that just recently ended for us. The Soviet Union was in Afghanistan and we didn't like it. We funded a group called the Mujahideen, and a famous member of the Mujahideen was Osama bin Laden. And basically, the Soviet Union didn't take over Afghanistan. So, because of our help, that was a big deal. Unfortunately, all this kind of domino affected into 9/11, but that was future United States problem. So here's my question for you. Ronald Reagan's Cold War game plan was to do what? So, fast forward, we're going to go to 1985. We're going to go to where the new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, excuse me, is going to take power. And he is going to say a lot of good things about Nikita Khrushchev and basically talk crap about Stalin. And those are going to be some massive blows to the Soviet Union political party. And all the while, it's worth noting that Mikhail Gorbachev is the first Soviet Union leader to be born under communism. So that's all he knew. He knew how oppressive it was. So when he's exposing all of this out in public, that Iron Curtain that we talked about was starting to weaken, and basically the toughness of the Soviet Union was starting to deteriorate. And he's passing these new laws that are changing how communism looks. Where communism kind of kept things secret, he passed this thing called Glasnost, which is basically lifted all the censorships and gave people freedoms back that they lost underneath communism in the Stalin, Vladimir Lenin times. So, this now new freedom sparked a second thing called perestroika. And this is going to be where the economy, the government is basically now going to have competition. Where before elections were just between communist member parties or communist members. Now, different political groups can now run for office. So, how we have Republicans and Democrats here in the United States, now it's going to be communists versus, they call them like republic something. I can't remember what it is, but long story short, they have a choice. And then outside competition is coming in for the economy. And this is what capitalism is, where before it was the government said, this is what you get type of thing. So here's a video. I cannot hit play on it for copyright reasons, but it shows when McDonald's first opened up in Moscow in 1990 and how long the line was. It was ridiculously long. So you're going to hear a little bit of the music. I apologize for that, whoever made the video, but if you can find it on YouTube, just look for that name right there and you'll be shocked. Okay, so where does this all officially lead to the end? Cold War relations with diplomacy. Our guy, Ronald Reagan, meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev, they're going to agree to disarm a lot of nuclear weapons and all the while basically agree that this whole thing is over. We're no longer in competition because we bankrupt the Soviet Union pretty much. We were going into massive debt at the same time. However, we don't really care about going into debt for some reason as our government. And in this glasnost and perestroika age, Ronald Reagan is going to urge that Mikhail Gorbachev tear down this wall. So when he tears down the Berlin Wall, that was just the symbol of the Cold War ending. But it really ended when he lost an election to a guy named Boris Yeltsin. That's going to bring an end to the Cold War because the Soviet Union is no longer communist. It switches over to a republic. So, why this matters is that when the Soviet Union breaks apart into Russia again, there's going to be the birth of 14 other countries that now basically get to govern themselves in the world. So, that's kind of a big deal that people now finally have this self rule again in Russia. So, Cold War effects as a whole. The world and being constant nuclear threat cannot be understated. This is a big deal. At any drop of a hat, your world could end forever. You also see the loss of lives in different wars, the stockpiling of weapons, as I said before, and trying to one up in each other. Again, it pushes technology to the brink, I guess you would say, along the way. Now, we have better weapons of it than now. However, during the time in the 80s, that was a big deal. And then once the Soviet Union broke apart and capitalism basically and freedoms were basically being made, this is what's going to called flatten the world, where all of this brain power that's happening in the Soviet Union can now be shared by the world. Outside world can go in, inside world can go out in the Soviet Union, Russia now, and the speed of information is going to increase tremendously. So I'm going to talk about this event more later in the unit in the globalization lesson, but this is one of the bigger world happenings that cannot be overstated. So a question for you, true or false? At the conclusion of the Cold War, Russia, former Soviet Union, remained communist.